Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. I'm Perryn Keys. I'm the executive sports editor. Joined today by Wilson Alexander, our lead LSU football beat reporter, and by Edward Scott Rabalais, our venerable longtime columnist, who we should say happy birthday to Rab. Happy birthday,
Rab.
You look great at 39.
Thank you. I'm doing the Jack Benny thing. I'm going back to 39, and I'm staying there.
It's a good move.
As he used to say, yes.
So LSU takes care of business on Saturday night in Tiger Stadium against Auburn. They win 48-18. Plenty to like from that game. A little sloppy at times, but plenty to like from that game if you're an LSU football fan. These two gentlemen are, I'm sure, happy to be in some cooler weather for the second straight week, and we will discuss this all, the big Auburn win, as well as Army coming up, followed by an open date, and then, of course, Alabama. Gentlemen, welcome in.
Good to be here. The weather has been awesome in Baton Rouge the last few days. And we've had it 2 weeks in a row getting to go to Missouri.
Yes.
So it was just a perfect kind of football night in Tiger Stadium. Sort of like in the first quarter, like your peak Tiger Stadium atmosphere there for a little bit. Thinned out as LSU throttled them, but it was really, really lovely there for a little while in particular.
Yeah, it wasn't what you expected typically from an LSU Auburn game. The crowd's gonna stay there and stay in it. But when they were there, it was Tiger Stadium was loud. It was a great atmosphere. It was a great night, and kind of classic thing. I always tell people from other parts of the country, if you care about college football, you have to come to a game on a Saturday night in Tiger Stadium, and this is one of the ones you'd want to experience.
We should bring that up actually at some point. Maybe one of the, maybe the top 5, 10 atmospheres and stadiums you all fine gentlemen have been in. But we should get to the business at hand first. First things first, before we dig into Army and to the Auburn game, we should tell you that obviously you know that the Advocate's always been known as the number one destination for LSU football coverage, and this podcast is just another great way for us to bring our coverage to you. You can subscribe to The Advocate if you haven't already. Go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's for our print edition and our digital edition. Also, if you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter, our LSU newsletter. Rab handles that 3 times a week, but it's a daily newsletter delivered straight to your inbox, to your desktop, to your phone. To do that, to sign up, you go to theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We are here every Monday and Thursday. You can find us live on our YouTube channels, the Advocate YouTube channels, and they will also be there for you to peruse as well after we're done going live. So by all means, check us out there as well. So guys, 48-14. As you mentioned, the crowd was definitely into it, as you would suspect for a typical LSU Auburn game. They tapered off, as you would suspect, because LSU had the game in hand. But certainly the atmosphere was there when it needed to be, and LSU took care of business as they needed to do. So I'll start with you, Wilson, just sort of your general first impressions, 2 cents.
This was the most complete game that LSU has played in about a month. LSU played a complete game in Starkville against Mississippi State, but had not since then because of the struggles that it had had defensively. Now, this was not a good Auburn team, not a good Auburn offense in particular. I think defensively we learned some. Auburn, had a solid group there, and we learned, I think, in this game that LSU really can score on just about anybody. If you didn't already know that, this maybe solidified that for you. But they did some good things defensively, started to improve there a little bit, and really, for the first time in a while, played complementary football. That was something that LSU's been looking for because of the struggles on the defensive side. That showed up here in this game, and they were able to really put things away, really by about the third quarter, because it was a 2-score game there for a little bit, but LSU played really one of the best games that it has in its totality this season.
Yeah, and again, led by the offense, which the first half you're like, they've been playing so well, and you go, they only have 20 points in the first half. You look at 20 points and 300 yards total offense. So it's like, it's another excellent performance. But the defense, as Wilson said, did a good job. Auburn, it was still a game at halftime, 20-7. Auburn got the ball to start the second half. If they go down and score a touchdown, it's game on. They're back in it. They've got momentum after falling down 17-0. LSU held them to a field goal, came down, scored a touchdown, got another touchdown, and the game was pretty much over at that point. And then they tacked on a couple more in the fourth quarter. So offense played very well. Defense, not great, good, but not great, but definitely better. And special teams, once again, not causing them any problems. They kicked well, and Caleb Jackson had a big 60-yard kickoff return. So special teams. This time last year, this. If we were doing this last year, we would have been talking a lot about special teams. What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem? And that hasn't been the case this year. So credit to LSU for improving in that area as well. So as Wilson said, the best all-around game. To me, it's the best all-around game they've played this season against a reasonably quality opponent, a team that obviously gave Georgia a very tough game. It was 2020 in the fourth quarter, I think, that game in Auburn, and LSU handled them very, very comfortably. And that says a lot about the momentum they're building and maybe the confidence they're gaining at this point in the season when you need to.
Yeah, we'll get to special teams, and I want to talk a little bit at least about third down. LSU holds Auburn at 2 of 9 on third downs, which was such an issue.
3 of 12, I think, right?
You are correct. I was looking at the wrong number. I apologize. But 3 of 12. Either way, it was far, far, far better than against a suspect offense, but nonetheless far better than what we had seen over the past 3, 4, 5 weeks from LSU, from the LSU defense. And to Harold Perkins, we ought to discuss Harold Perkins too. But first, let's not bury the lead. Let's talk about Jayden Daniels, 418 yards in all, 325 yards passing, 93 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns. You guys have both discussed the offense a little bit in broad, but just Jayden Daniels, what else can you say about the guy?
I don't know what else you really can say about the guy. He's been fantastic. He is one of the probably 2 best, maybe the best quarterbacks in the country this season. In terms of every measure, he is one of the best players in all of college football this season. The evolution of Jayden over the last year has been remarkable to see. People around the program were really high on what he was going to do this year, but even some of them didn't quite expect him to be like the best quarterback in the nation the way that he has been to this point. In terms of total yards, he is first. Yards per attempt, he is first with 11. Think about this. Jayden Daniels was at 7.5 yards per attempt last season. It was the career low. And I know I've mentioned that number before, but just try to wrap your brain around how he has raised that by 3.5 yards per attempt over one season. That is really hard to do. And of course, there's a lot of games left. Maybe it comes down, but you've got a really big sample size at this point. Brian Kelly even mentioned today that defenses have been trying to do different things in terms of their coverage. Early on in the season, teams were playing a lot of single high, which opens themselves up to one-on-one matchups on the outside that Jayden was just attacking and taking advantage of, especially on those sort of slot fades to Malik Neighbors. They've started to be able to take some of those things away at times by doing more quarters coverage and some other exotic coverage things. But Jayden has done a fantastic job, Kelly said, of recognizing that. The staff has been anticipating that and making adjustments. Nothing has been able to really slow this group down. This is 3 straight games now where they've scored 45 or more points. As Brian Kelly said today, don't take it for granted because this stuff is special that you're seeing this. Think about this. 2 offenses within the last 5 years that LSU fans would have been waiting for years. You've got them. And obviously it's unfortunate right now that the defense is not better, so that you're not really in the championship hunt with an offense that very well could be. Jayden has been the engine for all of it. He's been absolutely phenomenal. And if the Heisman Trophy ceremony were this week, he'd be 1 or 2.
He certainly should be, and we'll get to the Heisman race here in a moment. Wilson, you mentioned something to me off camera about the big difference, or one of the big differences between Jayden last year and this year, and for that matter, last year in addition to his time at Arizona State compared to this year was the knock on him, so to speak. The question is whether he could throw it deep and whether he could be deep and accurate. And well, I'll just let you go from there. The sort of the numbers that you were able to pull out on that.
Yeah. So the yards per attempt number is a reflection of that. He has never averaged more than 9 yards. I mean, his freshman year at Arizona State, he was 8 point something. I can't remember exactly what the last part of that was. But it had steadily gone down over the course of the last 4 years from that freshman year when he had guys like Brandon Ayuk and some other targets on the outside who were really helping expand that Arizona State offense. And you saw him launching it a little bit on tape, and then it just went away for a variety of reasons. Arizona State, as you've seen, I think over the last couple of years, everybody can see is kind of in shambles, and they went through a lot of different offensive coordinators. Jayden went through some personal stuff in his life, losing his grandparents. There was just a lot that went on at Arizona State to cause him to even throw 10 interceptions and 10 touchdowns and regress as a downfield passer. Those 10 interceptions, 10 touchdowns was his junior year before he transferred to LSU. What you've seen now is that he's letting it rip downfield. He's doing a great job of attacking the middle of the field, taking advantage of those one-on-one matchups. And the numbers bear it out. Right now, Jayden is the best quarterback in the country statistically on throws of 20-plus yards downfield.
That
Wrap
was the
that
number
around your head for a second.
That was the number that blew me away.
His completion percentage is 63.6. That is the best among qualified, among starting quarterbacks in the country.
On downfield throws.
This is on throws
yes.
20 yards or more downfield. Yes, all specifically to this. His touchdown to interception ratio on those throws, 13-0.
Incredible.
The next best is J.J. McCarthy has thrown 10 touchdowns and 1 pick. I think Caleb Williams has also thrown 10 touchdowns and 1 pick on 20-plus yard throws. Jayden has been, by that metric, the best quarterback in the nation, and that's not something that you could have said last year.
Speaking of which, best quarterback in the nation. We've discussed this several podcasts in a row now. But when Jayden Daniels has a game like he had against Auburn, similar to the way he's played, the entire season, grouped with Michael Penix defeats Bo Nix head-to-head when Washington defeats Oregon on Saturday, and Caleb Williams goes up to South Bend and has probably his worst game as a college quarterback. Now all of a sudden there are two, not the two front runners, but two of the front runners for the Heisman race who get bumped down a peg. And, we've discussed this many times now. For whatever reason, sometimes fair, sometimes not. You lose a game as a quarterback, your chances at the Heisman go down. Jayden has some work to do. Obviously, he's got 2 losses on his record. But would it surprise you, and I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, Rab, do you know where Jayden Daniels stands right now in terms of the odds to win the Heisman Trophy, where he is in the pecking order?
Well, there are different odds. The ones I saw, he was tied for 4th.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which gets you right on the cusp of being a finalist. They take the top 4 vote getters.
That's correct.
To New York for the Heisman ceremony.
So Penix is minus 140. He's far and away the leader, but Washington's going to have some tough games, a bunch of tough games actually between now and the end of the season, up to and including Oregon, who they may see again in the Pac-12 championship game if they don't see Utah or somebody else like that. But the Pac-12 is having a great year. They're going to have a bunch of difficult games to go. Dylan Gabriel and J.J. McCarthy from Michigan are tied for the second best odds, plus 1,000. J.J. McCarthy, God bless him, and I don't mean to take away anything from him, but to this point, he and Michigan have not played anybody. I mean, let's just be honest. And they're not going to play when they play Penn State on November 11th, that'll be their first top 25 opponent of the season. They're playing Penn State and Ohio State, and those are the only top 25 opponents in the regular season. Dylan Gabriel, Oklahoma. We'll see what happens, obviously, in the Big 12 race, but they may very well get picked off by some other Big 12 team. And then you have Jayden Daniels and Jordan Travis of Florida State, both tied at plus 1,200 in terms of best odds for the Heisman Trophy. If you look at the numbers, and all we're looking at is the numbers, I don't know how you can't put Daniels second and or first in the running. Rab, just tell me what you think about all this. Tell me what you think about Jayden Daniels' chances to climb back up into finalist status and maybe even start knocking on the door. What has to happen?
Yeah, well, one of the things you mentioned, all those guys, Penix, Gabriel, McCarthy, Travis, they're all on undefeated teams, and that does weigh, as I've mentioned on the podcast. I think that weighs into the psychology of Heisman voters who inherently, maybe it's not a verbalized thing, maybe it's not something you actually, express even to yourself, but in the back of your mind, a lot of voters want to vote for the best player on the best team. And LSU has 2 losses. They're not that. Now, we've seen Heisman voters in the fairly recent times win with multiple losses. Tim Tebow, the year he won, they had multiple losses. Robert Griffith III, the year he won at Baylor, they had multiple losses. So
Lamar Jackson too, who's sort of similarly in terms of kind of players. Jayden
Griffin had
kinds
3.
of in the mold,
very much so. And LSU beat them in Orlando in the Capital One Bowl. It can be done, but it's more of a hurdle to climb, obviously, and it's not Jayden's fault that the LSU's defense has been very challenged to the point giving up 45 points to Florida State in the loss in Orlando and 55 points in the loss to Ole Miss. It wasn't because he was throwing pick sixes or anything like that. It's just they came up short because the defense couldn't get the stops they needed, and the offense wasn't great against Florida State in the second half too. Let's admit that as well.
I do think that'll come into play. If it winds up being Jayden Daniels and Jordan Travis, he does have the head-to-head, and that was legit too.
It was, but he is a legitimate Heisman finalist. And, again, it all comes down to the vote getters. It's, there's, the 900 something voters around the country who, how they pick. You vote first, second, and third. The Heisman people look at the numbers and they say, okay, the top 4 guys are being invited to New York. And then they announce the winner, of course, the Saturday after the SEC championship game. So he's got a great shot. And I think there's a little bit of Joe Burrow recency bias is probably not going to play in his factor either. But it's not something that can't be overcome. And because I said when we talked about this last week, I said his numbers are great, but they're not going to compare to. He's not going to catch Joe, who has 6,000 yards total offense and 65 touchdowns. But they're going to be pretty great. Well, I mean, they're going to be very similar to the quarterback who won at Oklahoma a few years ago.
Baker Mayfield or Kyler Murray?
Kyler Murray's. His numbers are starting to resemble that. And this offense is starting to do things that even the 2019 team didn't. The 6 straight games with over 500 yards. They didn't do that in 2019. Not that they were bad in any way, of course, but they had 4 games where they didn't eclipse 500 yards total offense. And they're just on a roll, man, and they're going to pile it up against Army again this week, you think, and then you go to Alabama. That's the next showdown game that's left on the schedule where he's going to have to show and to shine. And if he can do that, it's all about capturing the imagination of voters. That's why it's hard to repeat. That's why it was hard for Peyton Manning to win that year. He was such a huge favorite because he didn't seem to have the Heisman moment that Charles Woodson did when he had the return and he was doing his thing. And, that matters. It's a psychological thing in a lot of respects, as well as the performance on the field. But he's doing it on the field, and people have to give him that respect at this point.
He is doing it on the field. To that point, Michael Penix, to take nothing away from him, he's having a great season, incredible season, really. 72% completion rate, 2,300 yards, 2,301 yards, 20 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Michael Penix has 4 yards rushing this season. That's the big difference between him and Daniels.
Penix has also played 1 less game. I've seen those kind of.
That's true. That's fair.
I've seen a lot of like the total yards comps and stuff. In terms of yards per game, Jayden is still ahead of Penix. Which would take into account some of those the fact that they haven't played the same amount of games. But in terms of some of like the overall passing numbers, Jayden has played 1 more game than Michael Penix at this point. So that stuff's going to even out a little bit, and we'll get a better picture come November exactly how they're comparing head to head.
Jayden is the scariest dual threat player in the country. You can say that, he is.
You can say that. I would say very easily.
He can throw for 300 and rush for 100, and it doesn't shock you.
First things first, I can't remember probably Griffin would be the only other quarterback who comes to mind who is as fast when he takes off on the run as Daniels has been this year. 515 rush yards for Daniels to this point. Let's go backward a little bit and talk about the offense, in particular some personnel. Emery Jones, the right tackle, went down with an ankle injury during the first quarter, the second drive of that game against Auburn. And you gentlemen just got back from speaking with Brian Kelly. Can you tell us sort of where he stands going into this Army game?
He's doubtful for this game, which isn't necessarily a surprise. But Kelly didn't. A few good things. Kelly has not used the words high ankle sprain. Only ankle sprain.
That's good.
And that is a great thing to hear because the high ankle sprains take much longer to come back from. He did not put a specific timeline on Emery Jones' return, but similar to Mekhi Wingo, who's also doubtful for this game simply because Mekhi's been dealing with some lower body stuff all year and just been playing through it. He is expressed some confidence in a fairly expedient return. So that's something that they'll have to continue to keep an eye on. But Kelly's pretty optimistic, and Kelly is usually pretty straightforward about a player's injuries. So I think you can sort of not think that it doesn't seem like he's covering anything up in this case. Seems like Emery Jones is one of those situations with both him and Mekhi where you've got the Army game and then you've got a bye week, and you're kind of keeping them out in order for them to be full health going to Alabama.
Yeah. Brian talked. He said all the right things about it. We have to take Army seriously and give our best effort. Or we can get beat. We're not. What did he say? We're not a team that can turn on the dimmer switch.
Yeah.
And expect to.
That's a great way to put it.
But they're a 30-point favorite over Army. They're going to win this game. They're going to have a week off. If you're going to have an injury, this is the time to have it and let someone rest and heal up, and to try to have them at their best or as close to it as possible for the Alabama game. So you're not going to see those guys this week. And obviously they got next week off. Then you want to see them healthy and playing on the field again in Tuscaloosa.
And then, LSU also has, I mean, of course that it's Army, but even if it wasn't necessarily an Army opponent, you've got a freshman in Zalance Hurd who you feel pretty good about.
Yes.
He played well in that Auburn game, had a couple of penalties, but was overall really steady. And so, he'll come in at right tackle in Emery's place for this game. And then everything there shouldn't be any sort of drop off in terms of what you're getting on the offensive line against Army, at least. Against Alabama, I might have more concerns if Emery Jones wasn't back in the lineup. But against Army, they should be okay just being able to slide Lance right into that right tackle spot.
This was, I thought it was noteworthy, as I know you guys did as well. I thought that it's probably comforting if you're part of the LSU football program or a fan or whatever. This is the second straight week now that one of the starting offensive linemen has had to go out of the game because of an injury. Against Missouri, it was the center, Charles Turner, who goes out. They experiment with Marlon Martinez. He has some trouble with the snaps. They put in Charles Turner, freshman. He goes in. Charles Turner. DJ Chester goes in. He takes care of business and helps LSU close out that game. And then, of course, here last week, just as you said, Lance Hurd comes in for Emery Jones, and they don't miss much of a beat. They continue on with what they've done. This is the LSU Sports Insider podcast, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. You know where to find all our writers' great work. That's at theadvocate.com. You should subscribe if you haven't already. Please go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. And again, get a hold of our newsletter, all the news and all the headlines and all the best football coverage, LSU football coverage from The Advocate straight to your inbox. To do that, to sign up, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. And if you want to watch us bandy about and discuss all things LSU football, we're here on Mondays and Thursdays live on our YouTube channels and all our social channels, and then also after the fact on the Advocate's YouTube page. So let's get to the front seven. We discussed that a little bit. I thought I did want to bring up one person in particular. I know you guys, probably got sick of me mentioning this 2 or 3 or 4 times to you guys and to Sheldon, but I thought it was really interesting that Paris Shand, who's a sort of a seldom used defensive end, a transfer from Arizona, he got into the game and didn't just play a couple of snaps here and there. They weren't just doing that just to give somebody a breather, or maybe they were doing that to give somebody a breather, but they felt confident in his ability to come in and contribute suddenly. He finishes with 6 tackles, 1.5 for loss, and 1 pass breakup at the line of scrimmage. That, in addition to just sort of generally, if you guys want to just sort of give your 2 cents on the LSU front seven, how you felt they played against a team that was challenged and is struggling on offense in Auburn. Wilson?
They are struggling on offense, but they run the football a lot. Auburn came into this game averaging 202 yards rushing per game. LSU held them to 139.
Yeah.
And a big chunk of that came on the last drive of the fourth quarter when the game was well in hand anyway. Before that, Auburn was averaging somewhere around 3.7 yards a carry. It ended up being 4.1. But LSU did a fantastic job of shutting down the run in this game. And that's what impressed me most about LSU defensively in this game, because that was kind of the one area of concern that we had going into this was, is LSU going to be able to stop the run? And it did. It did effectively. Its gap principles have been a lot better. Brian Kelly talks about it in a way, he uses the phrase taking the air out of the offense. And he was asked about tackling postgame, which was, again, much improved since the Ole Miss game. That has not been nearly as much of an issue. Props to LSU for getting that figured out over the last 2 games in particular, because otherwise you'd still be having, although the defense hasn't been utterly fantastic, it's been a little bit better, and a big part of that's tackling. And part of that, he said, is because their gap integrity is better. You don't have the safeties and the other DBs coming down and having to try to defend as much space. The windows are smaller, and so it's easier to make a tackle and break down and finish on somebody when that offensive player doesn't. That they're going to have an inherent advantage as an offensive player if they've got a ton of space. And LSU has been able to take some of that away. And so to see that was, I think, a very encouraging thing for this defense. Paris had a great individual game as well. So, good to see that happen. And maybe he can work his way, continually do so in the rotation and get an even bigger role coming out of that. We'll kind of, see how he does against Army. But that was probably what impressed me the most defensively, was the ability to stop the run and tackle.
Auburn with 100. LSU holds Auburn to 154 yards passing, 139 yards rushing, which is a little bit more than certainly Auburn. You mentioned Rab going into the game that Auburn had not passed for more than 100 yards against another FBS opponent. 154 yards passing, but that's still a fine showing.
Pretty acceptable in today's modern college football. You know, I'm sitting here thinking about the issues LSU had at the defensive front. They brought Pete Jenkins in as a defensive analyst, and one of the first things he said was they adjust how they crowded the line a little more. They were playing too far off the line of scrimmage, giving other teams, especially like Ole Miss in that game, how well they ran the ball, a chance to really get some push. And it makes me think, we don't think about assistant coaches or a position coach making a difference, but the illness of Jimmy Lindsey in August, when they lost him, and then they had another change. Kelly had to shift around the defensive line, move John Jancic from linebackers right to D-line. Bob Diaco goes from being a defensive analyst to coaching linebackers. He was already going to be the special teams coordinator, though they're doing special teams. Everybody's doing a little piece.
Specifically outside linebackers, it should be noted because Matt House coaches the inside backers.
Thank
but
you.
Continue. Yeah.
But shifting around, changing things, and they've changed defensive line coaches annually anyway. There's been a lot of change there, and it hasn't helped. It makes you think. Just one or two stops against Ole Miss. Ole Miss threw for 400 and ran for 300. If they could have had just a couple of stops or a little more pressure, either stopping the run or getting pressure on Jackson Dart, maybe they win that game. And they're undefeated in conference. I mean, it's such a fine line for this team, and they've gotten a lot of criticism, and rightly so. I mean, the LSU built its reputation, as I've said, on defense, and it hasn't been there for a lot of the season. But maybe now we're starting to see a piece here, a piece there, a performance here, a performance there, like Parashan, like we've seen with Braden Swinson making the big hit in the Missouri game to force the long sack fumble that Missouri recovered, but they put him in an impossible situation, and they couldn't convert the first down. Plays like that. Harold Perkins starting to look like Harold Perkins, again. I just voted on the AP midseason All-American team because I'm an AP voter. I didn't vote Harold Perkins first team All-American, midseason All-American like he was preseason All-American, but I did, I do think he's playing more in that role, more in that vein. So it's they've had some. I guess my point is that it takes good play, good coaching, and good fortune to be a championship team, and LSU is starting to get some of those things together. With the overarching theme being they have a tremendous offense, as Wilson said, that anyone's going to have trouble stopping. And maybe if they can just get a little, just be average, just be an average defensive team. As we used to say about LSU in the passing game years ago, covering LSU, if they could just be middle of the pack, in the nation, passing the ball, they would be tremendous because the defense was so good. Now it's the other way around. And you're starting to see some flashes here. And another week, another chance to build confidence against a team that you should beat handily, and then go in the Alabama game. And the offense obviously gives you a great chance to win that game and every game.
And, like we keep saying, Auburn, this was not a good Auburn offense at all. And so it doesn't necessarily give you a full indication of, the secondary's gotten immensely better. There was Zay Alexander got beat early on in the game on Auburn's touchdown drive. But credit to him, he came back and had 2 pass breakups after that. There was one when he did actually a very good job of getting his entire body, not just his head, but his whole body turned around, almost had an interception. Brian Kelly said he'd been challenging Alexander to do those kinds of things, to get turned around and play the ball in the air. So you saw some glimmers of that, here and there. And you're going to have to go and do it against a better opponent in a few weeks against Alabama, even though they don't have necessarily a fantastic passing game with Jalen Miller at quarterback. Those November tests are going to be much more difficult. So LSU's got a couple weeks here to kind of maybe continue to make some more of those improvements and strides. I think what you can maybe hang on to some hope for, that wasn't just singularly a product of Auburn being bad on offense, was that you look at the second half of the Missouri game as well. LSU they gave up 14 points in the second half to Missouri, and so now you've got 6 quarters of football in which you've allowed 32 points. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily what you want defensively, I guess.
But it's much better.
But it's much, much better, and it gives you, again, because this offense is so good, that's really just all you need to be.
You mentioned Rab at the top near the top of the podcast that the only time really this game felt like where LSU might be in a little bit of trouble was when Auburn gets the ball in the third quarter, down 20-7. Do I have that correct? Yeah, they're down 20-7. If they go all the way down, punch it in. Well, now it's 20-14 in a game you've dominated. Gets a little troublesome. On that third down, speaking about getting third down stops, that was Harold Perkins who came off the corner level the guy, level the Auburn quarterback for a sack.
Came off untouched twice, two plays in a row. I don't understand that, but
that's right.
Continue.
But no, it's a sign that a couple of issues. Well, at the start of the season, Harold Perkins doesn't look like his former self, and LSU can't get off the field on third downs. Well, now you're starting to see that happen. Wilson, I was actually going to bring something up. You mentioned Zion Alexander in the secondary and tackling being better and everything like that. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit because we didn't prepare for this, but one change that we saw them make going into the previous week was putting Sage Ryan at corner. Just what's your perspective on that and how that's working and how the secondary looks just in general?
Yeah, they put Sage over there because they feel like in terms of fundamentals, he's just a little bit more sound and well-rounded. They think Brian Kelly has talked about his tackling before. He did miss a tackle in the Missouri game because he was trying to punch the ball loose instead of just bring a player to the ground. So that's something that you would need to correct. But is he maybe somebody who's going to be an X factor kind of player at corner? No. It's not a position he'd ever played at LSU before this preseason when LSU put him out there. But it seems to have studied them in some ways. They did a few things. I don't think it wasn't just Sage because they were getting beat early in that Missouri game trying to play man coverage, and then they dropped back to zone. And when they did that, that's when they started having more success. And Sage was certainly a piece of that. They did also, interestingly enough, in this game, when they went to their dime personnel, Denver Harris came back onto the field and Sage slid it back inside to nickel, which is really more of where he's used to playing. And then Ryan Yates came onto the field as a third safety. So Denver, who did not play in the Missouri game, he had a role in this as sort of that third corner. But yeah, in their base defense now, you've got Sage Ryan on one side and Zion on the other. And it's hard to say really if it's had like a measurable impact or effect because I think it's a lot of different things that are going on defensively to cause some of these little improvements that we're seeing. Not necessarily just putting one guy out there and he's, blanketing whoever it is that he's covering. But it's a part of what is sort of wholly changed defensively.
Okay, so LSU versus Army. 6:30 p.m. Saturday in Tiger Stadium. It will be on the SEC Network. LSU's a 30-point favorite in this game, over under 58.5. I think it's all understood that, and by the way, Army is not having a great year. They've had a fair amount of success, certainly among the service academies the past several years under Jeff Monken. They are in a bit of transition this year because they decided they really couldn't do triple option anymore. The NCAA sort of legislated out the ability to cut block outside the tackle. So Jeff Monken did not think that they could do triple option anymore. They had to be a little bit more of a conventional offense, and they're struggling. But one way or the other, we expect that LSU is going to handle business, take care of Army, take care of them comfortably. And so with that in mind, obviously after that is an open week, followed by the big kahuna, the big game against Nick Saban in Alabama. And so with that in mind, what are the objectives not only for the Army game, but this week leading up to the Army game and then coming out of it? Rap?
Continue to improve on defense. And by the way, Army's coming off a 19-0 loss to Troy. So that kind of tells you they're
struggling on offense.
They're not likely to keep pace with LSU's offense. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that here early in the week.
Prediction there.
Thank you. Brian Kelly talked about, like I said, he said the right things at his Monday press conference. They have to come out and not think that they can just beat anybody. They probably can, but just have that focus and attention to detail and just trying to improve a little bit. And of course, the number one thing, come out healthy. You're resting a couple of guys, likely, as we said, a couple of key players with this game and the open date going into the Alabama game. You don't need to get anybody else hurt. And we saw, and to that end, we saw Jayden Daniels slide a couple of times in the Auburn game. It's like he's taking off for the yards. He wasn't just leaping into people. He was like sliding and run out of bounds a couple of times. So those are all important things. And that's obviously a variable that you can't control because anybody could get hurt at any time of the game. But those are the big things. Just, you're going to win. You just want to come out of here this game and minimize any potential pitfalls or problems and just gain confidence. I think even against an Army, this defense can gain some confidence. Defense is so much about attitude and emotion, especially in college football. And I think that's something else you could gain this week with a good performance.
Wilson?
I don't have too much to add to that because I sort of think all the same sort of general things. Later in the week, on a Thursday pod, I think we can maybe talk more about, what you can also do in this game is start to get a look at maybe some other players.
Yep.
If it goes the way it should on paper in the second half, you can start to maybe get a glimpse at, Garrett Nussmeier. Let's check back in on how he's doing in terms of his development, and maybe someone like Javian Toviano, who's probably still in line for a red shirt this season, but this is one of those games where you can maybe play him later in the game, and just some other sorts of things like that. It's one of those tune-up games. At least it should be.
Right.
If you take care of business. I do agree with Brian Kelly that this team is not someone who can just kind of roll the ball out there and beat anybody. But this is someone where you don't want to turn that dimmer down, because you don't want to have the fear that you can't turn it back up when you need to against Alabama a few weeks later. So keep rolling. But it shouldn't be a game where you're fretting things in the second half, and you can start to, maybe get a glimpse of some of your younger players or guys who are further down the depth chart. Maybe, a little bit more of Aaron Anderson in the second half with him coming off a hamstring injury. Kind of get a glimpse of him, see what weeks again, stuff like that. Will be maybe the deeper look at the game that you can maybe start to figure some things out.
What's funny about this game and this opponent compared to some of the other games, Jayden, as you said, part of his numbers are good because LSU's he's had to play because LSU's in these fights, week after week after week, and he stayed the game a long time Saturday against Auburn, longer than I would have expected. This, in a strange sort of way, is a game that could work against him. What if he only plays the first half and throws for 211 yards and rushes for 43, throws for one touchdown, rushes for another one, and that's it? And a lot of voters around the country who may not get to see LSU, especially playing a night game, go, well, that wasn't a very good game against not a very good team. And, not really diving into the numbers. And it's hard. I mean, as I've said, we're Heisman voters, and it's hard. This was the first time I really saw Michael Penix play this past week in the Oregon game. Because they play on the West Coast and it's different times, and you got to focus on your team. So it's it'd be interesting to see how much LSU plays him in this game and what kind of numbers he winds up with.
And that's kind of like what we're going back to later. Like, it's all going to even out over the course of a 12-game regular season. Like, he might not put up some absurd numbers this week because he's coming out in the first half, just like Penix has played a full game less than Jayden, and then Jayden, they got a bye week, so he'll probably drop down in some of those national numbers in terms of his total yards of other players because of more games are able to catch up. But then you've got 4 more games in November against Alabama, against Florida, against Texas A&M, all in particular, Georgia State too, but that would probably be another one where you're maybe coming out at the half to make your case. And so he'll have plenty of time, even if this one if he's coming out of the half.
That's where we'll leave it for today. We're coming down the backstretch now, the college football season. 5 more games left for LSU over the next 6 weeks. Again, starting with Army at 6:30 p.m. Saturday in Tiger Stadium on the SEC Network. We will be back Thursday with another podcast previewing the Army game and whatever else is next to come. So by all means, stick with us for everything Louisiana college football. Go to theadvocate.com. You can subscribe if you haven't already. Please go and subscribe. You go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. That's theadvocate.com/subscribe. And get a hold of our newsletter. That's theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. Sign up there at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. And again, we will be here every Monday and Thursday, live on YouTube, live on the Advocate social channels, and then also after the fact on the Advocate's YouTube channel. So please stick with us. Again, for Wilson Alexander and Scott Rabalais, I'm Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.